Can a single act of desperation lead to hope and redemption? Meet Daniel, a homeless father doing whatever it takes to keep his son, Lucas, safe and fed. One morning, in a moment of desperation, he finds a lost credit card and makes a decision that will change their lives forever. In the hazy dawn of an early morning, the city streets lay silent and empty. The usual bustle of pedestrians and honking cars was replaced by the gentle hum of the occasional street sweeper and the distant, echoing footsteps of early risers. Daniel, with his scruffy beard and worn-out clothes, shuffled along the sidewalk, his eyes scanning the ground. His bare feet were accustomed to the cold, hard pavement, but his stomach growled with a hunger that had become all too familiar. Beside him, holding tightly to his hand, was his 6-year-old son, Lucas. Despite their dire circumstances, Lucas's spirit remained unbroken. His bright blue eyes sparkled with curiosity as he looked around, taking in the world with the innocent wonder of a child. He was Daniel's anchor, the reason he kept pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with a quiet desperation that pierced Daniel's heart. "I know, buddy," Daniel replied, his voice soft and soothing. "We'll find something to eat soon, I promise." As they walked, Daniel's mind raced with thoughts of how to find food. He had searched through dumpsters and begged on street corners, but luck had not been on their side lately. Just as despair began to creep in, a glint of something shiny caught his eye. Bending down, he picked up a small, plastic card from the ground. It was a credit card. Daniel stared at the card, his mind reeling. He knew the ethical implications of using someone else's card, but his son's hungry eyes made the decision for him. Desperation had a way of bending morals, and in that moment, he saw a chance to provide for Lucas, even if just for a day. "Come on, Lucas," Daniel said, tucking the card into his pocket. "Let's go to the market." The market was a few blocks away, a modest grocery store that catered to the local neighborhood. As they approached, Daniel felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He tried to appear inconspicuous, hoping that no one would question a disheveled man and his young son buying groceries with a credit card. Inside, the store was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the chilly morning outside. The aisles were filled with colorful displays of food, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. Lucas's eyes widened with delight as he looked around, his stomach momentarily forgotten in his awe. "Can we get some apples, Daddy?" Lucas asked, pointing to a display of shiny red apples. "Of course, buddy," Daniel replied, grabbing a few and placing them in a basket. He picked up a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a carton of milk. It was more than they usually had, and Lucas's excitement was contagious. They made their way to the checkout, and Daniel's heart pounded as he handed the card to the cashier. She swiped it without a second glance, and Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They left the store with a bag full of food, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. "Let's find a place to eat," Daniel said, leading Lucas to a nearby park. They found a bench under a large oak tree and sat down, spreading the food out in front of them. Lucas bit into an apple, his face lighting up with joy. "This is so good, Daddy." Daniel smiled, watching his son eat with such enthusiasm. "I'm glad you like it, Lucas. Eat as much as you want." They sat there for a while, enjoying their impromptu feast. The park was peaceful in the early morning, with only the sound of birds chirping and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe that things might get better. But as the initial euphoria wore off, guilt began to gnaw at him. He had used someone else's money, someone who might need it just as much as they did. He looked at Lucas, happily munching on a piece of cheese, and knew that he would do anything to keep his son safe and fed. But the weight of his actions pressed heavily on his conscience. "Daddy, are you okay?" Lucas asked, sensing his father's unease. Daniel forced a smile. "I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how much I love you," Daniel replied, ruffling Lucas's hair. "And how I'm going to make things right." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they finished their meal and packed up the leftovers. Daniel knew he had to return the card, but he wasn't sure how. He couldn't risk getting caught, not with Lucas depending on him. But he also couldn't ignore the voice in his head telling him that what he did was wrong. They spent the rest of the day wandering the city, looking for a place to rest. Daniel's mind churned with plans and possibilities, but none seemed feasible. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change, that he couldn't continue living like this. As night fell, they found a sheltered spot under a bridge. Daniel wrapped his arms around Lucas, holding him close for warmth. He stared up at the stars, their distant light a reminder of the vastness of the world and the smallness of their problems in comparison. "Daddy, will we be okay?" Lucas asked, his voice sleepy but filled with trust. "Yes, Lucas," Daniel whispered, his voice firm with determination. "We'll be okay. I promise." And as he lay there, with his son nestled against him, Daniel made a vow to himself. He would find a way to make things right. He would return the card and face whatever consequences came his way. For Lucas's sake, he had to believe that there was still hope, still a chance for a better life. In the silence of the night, under the vast, star-filled sky, Daniel found a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how difficult the journey ahead, he would keep moving forward. Because for Lucas, for his precious son, he would do anything. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city streets. Daniel and Lucas were already up, having spent the night under the bridge. Daniel's mind was still racing from the events of the previous day, but he was determined to make the most of what little fortune they had stumbled upon. "Good morning, buddy," Daniel said, ruffling Lucas's hair as the boy rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Daddy," Lucas replied, a sleepy smile spreading across his face. "Are we gonna eat more of that food today?" "Yes, we are," Daniel answered, pulling out the remaining apples, bread, and cheese from their bag. "Let's have a proper breakfast." They sat together on the ground, the cool morning air invigorating their spirits. Lucas bit into an apple with relish, the crisp crunch echoing in the quiet morning. Daniel took a piece of bread, savoring the simple pleasure of a meal shared with his son. As they ate, Daniel couldn't help but think about what he had done. The guilt was still there, but it was overshadowed by the sight of Lucas's happiness. It had been so long since they had a meal like this, and he couldn't bring himself to regret it entirely. "Daddy, can we go to the park again today?" Lucas asked, his mouth full of apple. "Sure, we can," Daniel replied, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "We'll go after we finish eating." They lingered over their breakfast, enjoying the rare feeling of being full. When they finally packed up and set off, the city was starting to come to life around them. People were hurrying to work, cars were honking, and the air was filled with the sounds of a bustling metropolis. At the park, Lucas ran ahead to the playground, his laughter ringing out as he climbed the jungle gym and slid down the slide. Daniel watched from a bench nearby, his heart swelling with love and pride. Despite everything they had been through, Lucas's spirit remained unbroken. He was resilient and full of joy, and Daniel was determined to protect that no matter what. As he sat there, a man approached and took a seat on the bench next to him. He was dressed in a suit, his polished shoes a stark contrast to Daniel's bare feet. "Nice day, isn't it?" the man said, glancing over at Daniel. "Yeah, it is," Daniel replied, feeling a bit self-conscious. "I'm Mark," the man introduced himself, extending a hand. "Daniel," he replied, shaking Mark's hand. Mark watched Lucas play for a moment before turning back to Daniel. "Your son?" "Yes," Daniel said, a hint of pride in his voice. "That's Lucas." "He's a great kid," Mark observed. "You must be doing something right." Daniel smiled, but didn't say anything. He didn't want to explain their situation, didn't want to see the pity in Mark's eyes. Mark seemed to sense this and changed the subject. "So, what do you do, Daniel?" "I'm between jobs," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone light. "Just trying to make ends meet." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's tough out there. But hey, if you ever need a hand, I'm around. Just come by the community center on Maple Street. I volunteer there sometimes." "Thanks," Daniel said, appreciating the offer even if he wasn't sure he would take it. They sat in silence for a while, watching Lucas play. Eventually, Mark got up to leave. "Take care, Daniel. And remember, there's always help if you need it." I will. Thanks, Mark, Daniel said, watching as he walked away. When Lucas finally tired of the playground, Daniel took his hand and they wandered through the park. They found a quiet spot by the pond and sat down on the grass. Lucas watched the ducks swim by, his eyes wide with fascination. Daddy, can we feed the ducks? Lucas asked, looking up at him. Sure, buddy, Daniel said, pulling out a piece of bread. They tore it into small pieces and tossed them to the ducks, laughing as the birds scrambled for the food. As the day wore on, Daniel found himself relaxing. For a little while, he allowed himself to forget about their problems and just enjoy the moment with Lucas. They wandered the park, exploring every corner, and even found a small ice cream cart where Daniel treated Lucas to a cone with the last of their change. The sun was starting to set when they finally left the park. Lucas's hands were sticky from the ice cream, and he was chattering excitedly about all the things they had seen and done. Daniel smiled, his heart full. Back under the bridge, they settled in for the night. Daniel spread out their blankets, and Lucas curled up beside him, resting his head on Daniel's chest. Today was a good day, Daddy, Lucas murmured, his eyes heavy with sleep. Yes, it was, Daniel agreed, kissing the top of Lucas's head. Sleep tight, buddy. As Lucas drifted off, Daniel lay awake, staring up at the darkening sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, twinkling faintly in the twilight. He thought about the credit card, still tucked away in his pocket, and the promise he had made to himself to return it. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would find a way to make things right. For now, he was content to hold his son close and cherish the small victories. They had food, they had each other, and for tonight, that was enough. With a sigh, Daniel closed his eyes, the sound of Lucas's steady breathing lulling him to sleep. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. And as long as they had each other, there was always hope. The next morning arrived with the soft light of dawn, bathing the city in a gentle glow. Daniel stirred from his sleep, feeling the familiar ache in his bones from a night spent on the hard ground. Beside him, Lucas was still sleeping peacefully, his small body curled up under their thin blanket. Daniel sat up quietly, careful not to wake his son. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the credit card. It felt heavy in his hand, a symbol of his moral struggle. He knew he couldn't keep using it, but returning it posed its own risks. Today's the day, he whispered to himself, steeling his resolve. Lucas began to stir, his eyes fluttering open. Morning, Daddy, he said, stretching his arms. Morning, Lucas, Daniel replied, tucking the card back into his pocket. How about some breakfast? They shared the last of their food, savoring the simple meal. Daniel's mind was already racing with plans. He needed to find the owner of the card and return it without getting caught. But first, they needed to find a place to clean up. A public restroom would suffice for now. After packing up their belongings, they set off into the city. The streets were already coming to life, with people hurrying to work and vendors setting up their stalls. Daniel led Lucas to a nearby park where he knew there were public restrooms. They took turns washing up as best they could, feeling somewhat refreshed afterwards. All right, buddy, Daniel said, kneeling down to Lucas's level. Today, we have an important mission. We're going to find the person who owns this card and give it back. Lucas's eyes widened. But Daddy, won't we get in trouble? Daniel smiled, ruffling Lucas's hair. We'll be careful. It's the right thing to do. With Lucas's hand firmly in his, they set off towards the address printed on the back of the card. It was a few miles away, in a part of the city Daniel wasn't familiar with. They walked through bustling streets and quiet neighborhoods, the contrast between the two stark and jarring. As they walked, Daniel's mind kept drifting back to the previous day's encounter with Mark. The man's words echoed in his head, offering a glimmer of hope. But for now, his focus was on returning the card. They reached the address around midday. It was a modest apartment building, not too different from the ones they had passed on their way. Daniel's heart pounded as he approached the door, unsure of what to expect. He rang the bell and waited, Lucas standing close by. A few moments later, the door opened to reveal an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Hello, can I help you?" she asked, looking curiously at Daniel and Lucas. "Good morning, ma'am," Daniel began, feeling his nerves tightening. "I found this credit card, and I believe it belongs to you." He handed her the card, and the woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh my goodness! I didn't even realize I had lost it. Thank you so much." Daniel nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "I'm glad I could return it. My name is Daniel, and this is my son, Lucas." The woman's smile grew warmer. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. My name is Marjorie. Why don't you come in for a moment? I'd like to thank you properly." Daniel hesitated, but Lucas's hopeful eyes convinced him to accept the invitation. They followed Marjorie into her cozy apartment, where the smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the air. She led them to the living room and offered them a seat. "Would you like some cookies and milk?" Marjorie asked, already heading towards the kitchen. Lucas's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Daniel chuckled, feeling a bit more at ease. "Thank you, ma'am." As they waited, Daniel took in his surroundings. The apartment was small but warmly decorated, with family photos lining the walls and shelves filled with books and knickknacks. It felt homey, a stark contrast to the cold streets they were used to. Marjorie returned with a plate of cookies and 2 glasses of milk. Lucas dug in eagerly, while Daniel took a cookie and savored the taste. It had been a long time since he'd had something homemade. "So, Daniel," Marjorie began, sitting down across from them. "What brings you to this part of the city?" Daniel hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But something about Marjorie's kind demeanor made him feel he could trust her. "We've been having a tough time lately," he admitted. "We've been living on the streets, trying to get by." Marjorie's expression softened with empathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that. It must be incredibly difficult, especially with a young child." Daniel nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "It's been hard, but we're doing our best." Marjorie reached out and placed a hand on Daniel's. "You did a very kind thing today, returning my card. It shows you have a good heart. If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to ask." Daniel was taken aback by her generosity. "Thank you, Marjorie. That means a lot." They chatted for a while longer, Marjorie sharing stories of her own life and listening attentively to Daniel's. Lucas, having finished his cookies, explored the apartment, marveling at the various trinkets and photos. As they prepared to leave, Marjorie pressed a small envelope into Daniel's hand. "This is just a little something to help you get by," she said. "I insist." Daniel opened the envelope to find a few bills inside. His eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Marjorie. This will help more than you know." She smiled warmly. "Take care of yourselves, and remember, there are always kind people out there willing to lend a hand." Daniel and Lucas left Marjorie's apartment feeling lighter, their spirits lifted by her kindness. As they walked back through the city, Daniel couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. The world wasn't as cold and unforgiving as it seemed. There were good people out there, willing to help those in need. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Lucas asked, looking up at him with trusting eyes. Daniel smiled, squeezing Lucas's hand. "Yes, buddy. We're going to be just fine." With the envelope from Marjorie and the promise of help from people like Mark, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope for the future. He was determined to keep moving forward, to find a way to provide a better life for Lucas. And as long as they had each other, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. The days following their visit to Marjorie's apartment were marked by a new sense of determination for Daniel. Her kindness had sparked something within him, and he was more resolved than ever to change their circumstances. With the little money Marjorie had given them, Daniel was able to buy a few more days' worth of food and find a temporary shelter for the nights. "Daddy, do we have to go back to the streets?" Lucas asked one evening as they settled into a small room at a local shelter. The room was simple but warm, with 2 beds and a small table. "No, Lucas," Daniel said, tucking him into bed. "We're going to figure things out. I promise." The next morning, Daniel woke up with a plan. He remembered Mark's offer at the park and decided it was time to seek him out. The community center on Maple Street wasn't too far, and it seemed like the best place to start. "Come on, Lucas," Daniel said, helping his son get dressed. "We're going to meet someone who might be able to help us." Lucas nodded eagerly, always trusting his father's decisions. They left the shelter and made their way through the bustling city streets. The community center was a large, welcoming building with bright murals painted on the walls and a playground in the front. As they approached, Daniel felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Inside, the atmosphere was lively and cheerful. Children played in a corner while adults gathered around tables, chatting and working on various projects. Daniel spotted Mark near the front desk, talking to a group of volunteers. "Mark!" Daniel called out, waving as he approached. Mark looked up and a smile spread across his face. "Daniel! Lucas! Good to see you both. What brings you here?" "I was hoping to take you up on your offer," Daniel said, feeling a bit nervous. "We could use some help." "Of course," Mark said, his expression earnest. "Let's find a quiet spot to talk." They moved to a small office at the back of the center. Mark gestured for them to sit, and Daniel did so, with Lucas perched on his lap. "Tell me what's going on," Mark said, his tone gentle. Daniel took a deep breath and recounted their story, from losing their home to the daily struggles of living on the streets. He spoke of the credit card incident and how returning it to Marjorie had led to this moment. Mark listened intently, nodding and occasionally asking questions. When Daniel finished, Mark leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "You've been through a lot," he said. "But you've also shown incredible strength and integrity. I think we can help you get back on your feet." Daniel felt a surge of relief. "What do we need to do?" "Well," Mark began, "first, let's see about finding you a more permanent place to stay. The shelter is a good temporary solution, but it's not ideal for long term. We have connections with a few local housing programs that might be able to help." Daniel nodded, his hope growing. "That sounds great." "In the meantime," Mark continued, "we can also look into job opportunities. What kind of work have you done before?" "I've done a bit of everything," Daniel replied. "Construction, maintenance, some kitchen work. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." "Good," Mark said, making notes. "I'll see what we can find. And while we work on that, there are plenty of volunteer opportunities here at the center. It's a good way to meet people and get involved in the community." Daniel smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Thank you, Mark. This means a lot." Mark reached out and shook Daniel's hand. "We're here to help. You're not alone in this." Over the next few days, Daniel and Lucas became regulars at the community center. Daniel volunteered wherever he was needed, from helping in the kitchen to assisting with maintenance tasks. Lucas quickly made friends with the other children, his laughter filling the halls as he played. One afternoon, as Daniel was repairing a broken shelf in the center's library, Marjorie walked in. She spotted Daniel and smiled warmly. "Daniel, what a pleasant surprise," she exclaimed. "Marjorie! It's good to see you," Daniel replied, standing up to greet her. "I'm so glad to see you here," Marjorie said. "I volunteer at the center a few days a week. How have you been?" "Better, thanks to you," Daniel said. "Your kindness really helped us out." Marjorie waved her hand dismissively. "It was the least I could do. How's Lucas?" "He's doing great," Daniel said, nodding towards the window where Lucas was playing outside. "He's made a lot of friends here." "That's wonderful to hear," Marjorie said, her eyes twinkling. "If you need anything, Daniel, don't hesitate to ask." "I appreciate that, Marjorie," Daniel said. "Thank you." As the weeks went by, things slowly began to improve. Mark's connections came through, and Daniel was offered a job at a local construction company. It was hard work, but Daniel was grateful for the steady income. With Mark's help, they also found a small apartment through a housing program. It wasn't much, but it was a place to call home. On the day they moved into their new apartment, Daniel stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The walls were bare, and the furniture was sparse, but it was theirs. Lucas ran from room to room, his excitement infectious. "Look, Daddy! I have my own room," Lucas shouted, his face beaming with joy. Daniel laughed, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Yes, you do, buddy." They spent the evening unpacking their few belongings and making the place feel like home. As they sat down to a simple dinner at their new kitchen table, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had come so far, and there was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. That night, as he tucked Lucas into bed, Daniel whispered, "We did it, Lucas. We're going to be okay." Lucas looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "I knew we would be, Daddy." Daniel kissed his forehead and watched as Lucas drifted off to sleep. He sat by the window for a while, looking out at the city that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving. Now, it felt like a place of new beginnings. With a deep breath, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would keep working hard, keep moving forward, and never give up. Because for Lucas, for his son, he would do anything. And as long as they had each other, he knew they could face any challenge that came their way. Months had passed since Daniel and Lucas moved into their new apartment. The harsh winter had given way to a warm, promising spring. Their lives had begun to settle into a routine, one that brought stability and hope. Every morning, Daniel would head off to work at the construction site, and Lucas would go to school, where he was thriving both academically and socially. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel walked into their apartment to find Lucas excitedly showing off a drawing he had made at school. "Daddy, look! I drew our family," Lucas exclaimed, holding up a colorful picture. Daniel took the drawing and smiled. It depicted the two of them standing in front of their apartment, hand in hand, with big smiles on their faces. Above them, a bright sun shone down, and in the corner, a small heart had been drawn. "This is amazing, Lucas," Daniel said, ruffling his son's hair. "You did a great job." "Thanks, Daddy. I wanted to show everyone how happy we are now," Lucas said, his eyes sparkling. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "We really are, buddy. We really are." As the weeks went by, their lives continued to improve. Daniel was promoted at work, which meant a little more money and the possibility of saving for the future. He used some of his first extra paycheck to buy a few more pieces of furniture for their apartment, making it feel even more like home. One Saturday morning, as they were having breakfast, there was a knock on the door. Daniel opened it to find Mark and Marjorie standing there, smiling. "Good morning, Daniel," Mark said. "We hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Daniel replied, stepping aside to let them in. "Come in, please." "We have some news," Marjorie said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "The community center is hosting a big event next week, and we'd love for you and Lucas to join us." "What kind of event?" Daniel asked, intrigued. "It's a celebration of community and resilience," Mark explained. "There will be food, games, and lots of fun activities. We thought it would be a great way to bring everyone together and celebrate how far we've come." Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "We'd love to come. Thank you for inviting us." Lucas ran over, his eyes wide with excitement. "Can we really go, Daddy?" "Yes, we can," Daniel said, lifting Lucas into his arms. "It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun." The following week flew by in a blur of anticipation. When the day of the event finally arrived, Daniel and Lucas made their way to the community center. The place was buzzing with activity. Colorful banners hung from the walls, and the air was filled with laughter and the delicious smell of food cooking. Mark greeted them at the entrance, handing Lucas a ticket for the games. "Have fun, Lucas." "Thank you, Mr. Mark," Lucas said, running off to join a group of kids at the game booths. Daniel watched him go, his heart swelling with pride. He turned to Mark. "This is amazing. You've done a great job organizing everything." "It was a team effort," Mark said, smiling. "But we wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to celebrate and feel connected." As the day went on, Daniel found himself relaxing and enjoying the festivities. He chatted with other parents, helped Lucas with some of the games, and even joined in on a few himself. Marjorie was there too, overseeing a bake sale and ensuring everyone had plenty to eat. Later in the afternoon, Mark took the stage and called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Today, we are here to celebrate not just our community, but the incredible strength and resilience of everyone here. We've all faced challenges, but together, we've overcome them." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Mark continued, "We'd like to take a moment to recognize someone who has shown remarkable courage and determination. Daniel, would you come up here, please?" Daniel's eyes widened in surprise, but he made his way to the stage, Lucas trailing behind him. "Daniel, you've faced incredible adversity, yet you've remained steadfast in your commitment to your son and to creating a better life for both of you," Mark said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're an inspiration to all of us." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes as the crowd applauded. He looked down at Lucas, who was beaming with pride. "I don't know what to say," Daniel began, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you all for your support and kindness. We couldn't have made it this far without you." Marjorie stepped forward, holding a small box. "Daniel, we have something for you and Lucas. It's a small token of our appreciation and a symbol of the community's love and support." She handed the box to Daniel, who opened it to find a set of keys. He looked at Marjorie, confused. "These are keys to a house just outside the city," she explained. "It's a gift from the community. A place for you and Lucas to call home." Daniel was speechless. He looked at the keys, then at the faces of the people who had become like family to him. Tears streamed down his face as he hugged Marjorie, then Mark. "Thank you. I can't believe this," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "You deserve it, Daniel," Mark said, smiling. "You've worked so hard, and we wanted to give you and Lucas a fresh start." Lucas tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, we have a house now?" "Yes, Lucas," Daniel said, lifting his son into his arms. "We have a house." The crowd cheered, and Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude and joy. They had come so far from those dark days on the streets, and now they had a future filled with hope and possibilities. That night, as they sat in their new home, Daniel looked around at the cozy rooms and the promise of a brighter future. Lucas was already asleep in his own bed, his face peaceful. Daniel whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but with the support of their community and the love they shared, they could overcome anything. He had kept his promise to Lucas, they were going to be okay. And as he closed his eyes, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they were finally home.